Hello everybody and welcome to Daily Chains Model. Today's day 36 and I'm going to teach you how to make a bucket. Before you even touch Blender with your grubby little fingers, you want to do some research, because without research you ain't going anywhere. Find some images that look like the bucket you want to make and look for dimensions, because you cannot make shit without proper dimensions. Also find some information on how and why the item is built in such a way. For example, wooden buckets don't leak because they get soaked up with water and they get bigger and fill up all the holes. Once you finish all the research, you can start making the model. I started off by making a circle, and you want to make sure it's the correct scale. So I joined the edge and so I could see the proper scale and scale it into its proper scale. When you have the base, you can extrude it and make sure it has the proper height. Always keep on looking at your reference sheet. I recommend using PureRef. I don't use it myself, but I do use it sometimes when I have bigger projects. Then you want to go and add the rims for the bucket. You can accomplish this by adding edge loops on the top and bottom, making sure that is correct to the dimensions of the reference. Select top and bottom, duplicate it, and separate it as a new separate object. Always be sure to organize, rename everything, and place them into proper folders so that, or rather collections, so they don't get lost in the process, because if everything's just named cube and plane, you'll get lost. Next up, you can extrude by individual faces and scale it to the proper size, so that to make the planks for the bucket. Then I decided to select the bottom and scale it down just to give it a little bit more of a dynamic shape, a more bucket shape. Yeah, I like that. I then added some extra edge loops so that when I'm sculpting it, it doesn't look, well, distorted, and just trust me on this, adding extra edge loops will help it. You want to then duplicate the bottom for a future date so that you can model the not the lid, the bottom lid, I guess. Make sure to rename and organize. Then duplicate the base mesh to the body, rename it, and name it to a high poly, because now we're going to be sculpting on this. So I recommend bringing it into another collection where all of your high poly meshes will be there, just for organization purposes. Later on, this will be very useful during baking. You want to add a multi-res modifier and make sure you subdivide simple unless you're going for a more smooth look. But in this case, you want to go simple so that you keep those crisp edges. You can go into sculpt mode and start sculpting away. I like to use the scraping brush to get a more rounded edge. Also, make sure you have symmetry on X and Y, or Z even if you can. I can't do it for this because I scaled the bottom. Once you're done with your first layer, you can disable symmetry and add some unique details, some indents, and some cracks here and there. You can do this with various brushes. You could really just experiment. I really mainly use the crease clay, scrape, and draw sharp for extra details, like adding the creases, or rather the cracks right here. You just want to let your mind go crazy, just make squiggles, squaggles everywhere, however you want, and to get a general wood look. Later on, if you want to make, I don't know, concrete, the process of sculpting will be a little bit different, but you just want to experiment and find what works for you and what works for the style that you want to achieve. Now that the main body mesh is now sculpted, you want to go back to the bottom one. You want to extrude this upwards so it has thickness, and you really do not want these nasty endgons on top and bottom when sculpting, so delete them and do a grid fill. Make sure the lines are aligned on one of the axes, since we're going to be modeling long stripes. This will help with the topology. Even though topology isn't too important, but it was important during the sculpting process. Just sculpt it however you like. That's how I sculpt it. Another trick I use is using the crease brush to kind of make the creases smaller. You could either hold control or not control to make it sharper or less sharp if you want. Once that is done, you want to go back to the rim and extrude it, or rather scale it, and then extrude it so that it fits the bucket properly. Before you add the multi-res modifier, you want to make sure that the topology is roughly square-like, because if it's not, it will be hell drawing on it. And you want to make sure this is the same with every other pieces of object. I did that with the bucket too, but I didn't show it. This is generally how you want it to look before you add the multi-res modifier. Then you can start scraping the detail onto it. Just let your mind go crazy, experiment with the different brushes. I want to just add a small bevel to it, and then to add the screws, I just use the clay brush and add a little dimples all around the place. Make sure to use the symmetry to speed up your workflow. I also like to use a crease brush to add a little bit more detail to the screws. You can also add little chips and bits and everywhere using the clay brush. You could really just have fun with this sculpting process. Now it's time for the handle. In order to add the handle, I add a cube and merge the vertices in the middle. Then I position the vertice to its proper location and I give a skin modifier, scaling it down with Alt S or Control S, it's muscle memory at this point, giving it a subdivision surface just to see it as a preview. Later I'll be getting rid of that to make a smaller or less topology, and add a mirror modifier so that I have less work. Mirroring is amazing. You then want to extrude the vertices and just get a general shape that you want. However you like it, this is the shape I went for. Make sure the origin is in the correct spot so that when you rotate it, it actually rotates in the, well, in the way that the handle does. You don't want to get rid of the subdivision modifier, as I scaled it appropriately, however to be the correct size. Applied all of the modifiers except for the mirror modifier and started simplifying the mesh, because this is a game asset, so you want as simple as possible. I then had to make it a little bit more complex, so it's more circular, by beveling just the edges there. And then I want to add a little wooden handle, so I duplicated the faces near the middle there, and then I extruded along its normals to get a more thick handle because the wood is on the metal. As per usual, before multi-resing it, you want to make sure that the topology is somewhat squarish. Once you get that done, you can go ahead and sculpt it. Once again, let your mind go crazy. I just wanted to smooth this out a little bit and give it a bit of a rough metallic feel. We're now done with the sculpting process. Now we need to unwrap the simple mesh. So you go back to the block G meshes and unwrap. For the anything that's cylindrical, you can unwrap with a cylinder projection, and you get a pretty good result. But you need to make sure that there's no overlapping UVs, and if it is, just select it and move it around. Go across everything and unwrap it. For every mesh, it could be a little bit different depending on the shape of it. And orientate your UVs so that it's the most space efficient, so there isn't much space in between. Now, in order to bake your normals, it is very simple, but it is crucial you do it exactly how I do it. Any other method probably won't work too well. So you want to duplicate the best mesh and change it to a cage mesh, or rather just rename it and put it into a different collection just for organization purposes. This will help a lot. Do this with every single object. And once you've duplicated them, go back to the cage mesh and press Alt S to scale them along its normals so that it's just barely covering all of the high resolution mesh pieces. You also want to shrink wrap your low poly mesh to the high poly mesh so that it matches it better. I forgot to show that here, whatever. Now, in order to actually bake it, you want to go to the baking tab, which is on that one in the render tab, and change that to normal. And select to active and select your cage object that you made, the appropriate one. This is where the organization really starts to shine, because it's a lot easier to see where and what is where. So select the high poly mesh and then the low poly mesh with control click. Make sure you click on the image and press bake. Once it's done baking, you'll see that there is now a normal map. Go to the other objects and do the same thing, except the only difference now is you deselect the clear image. This is really important because without it, it'll just override your previous bake, and this is all the same texture. As you can see, it'll just add to it instead of overlapping it or overriding it. You want to go through and do this with every single object. If you have these weird artifacts, like I said, you want to shrink wrap it, and also it helps to add some supporting edge loops so you can then smooth shade it. It will increase the poly count a little bit, but it makes it look better. And re-bake everything. And then you could export that into Unity. I still didn't do all of the other texture maps, but I just want to see how it looks. So exporting into the Unity, making sure the normal map is set as a normal map so that it's calculated correctly. And I'm quite liking how it looks, but you want to make sure you look out for any of these problems here. You go back into Blender and figure out what it is caused by. This one was by overlapping meshes. See this, I didn't make sure on this part if there's anything overlapping, so I went ahead and unwrapped it in a more appropriate manner, and now it's fixed. Make sure you find these kind of stuff. Next is ambient occlusion. To pick the ambient occlusion, you select the ambient occlusion, select the high poly and then low poly the same way, select the cage one. To stop other objects from affecting this object, you can disable it in the renderer viewport. You can see now the rims are no longer affecting the body, which I don't really want. And now in order to make the metallic map, you change it to emit, and now you need to get the map. So I like to do this by going to the vertice, or rather the vertex groups, and calling it a metal vertex group, and assigning it to whatever you want to be metal. And in the shader graph, you want to make an attribute node and assign it to the metal. And once you view that, you can clearly see what is metal and what is not. White is metal and black is not metal. You want to do this for all of the objects and all of the faces that are supposed to be metallic. Here it is the rim and the handle. And as per usual, to bake it, you go into the render tab and select the metallic image that you create. I think I did this as a 512 by 512 because it doesn't have to be too high. And you go ahead and bake or select everything and bake it. And that's the baking process. You may, if you have multiple selected objects, it'll take longer, so you gotta wait. Then you want to go ahead and pack your materials in the composite place. You go ahead and select your different materials and you combine them with a combine RGB. If you want to use alpha as well, that's important. And then you go ahead and render it. You got to make sure that your render is the correct scale, and you can export it. Next, the favorite part, the best part is just painting it. So create a new material, go into texture painting, and paint it however you see fit with the colors you want. Make sure, or do look at your references. In this case, I didn't like the colors of the reference, so I had to choose my own colors. But yeah, just have fun with this. For the roughness, usually it's enough just to take the base color and put it through a color ramp. I also additionally added a noise texture just for some extra detail, but it's not really necessary. So you can bake that with the same emit process as before. And once you're done with the coloring and everything, you can then channel pack your RGB and your roughness, as the roughness being the alpha channel. You do this the same way I showed before, but this time it's putting the red, green, and blue into the red, green, blue output, and the roughness as the alpha output. Next, you want to duplicate and rename as an LOD, and you just want to decrease the amount of faces there are. I did this by merging some of the vertices for this LOD model, and for even lower LOD model, I just decimated it even further until it's basically just a cube with a texture on it, and that's fine for further distances. You want to go through all of the models, all of the separate things, and do it. And in Unity, just make sure just play around with distances and make sure it's not too visible. And well, this is the final result. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.